Good morning, everyone. Again, pleasure to be here. Live from Sarajevo. We have the world watching us now, so we're very excited. I want to just let you know that this is part of a series of conversations that UNFPA has been organizing around the 25th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development, the ICPD. That is what I want to tell you, and I'm going to give it back to you, Adnan.
Okay, thank you. We don't have just so much time, and my first question goes to Dr. Tomáš Sobotka, but first of all, just a short introduction of him. Dr. Sobotka leads the research group of fertility and family at the Vienna Institute of Demography. Currently, he is member of the Council of the European Association for Population Studies. Very welcome to our panel, and yeah, we know that you are an expert of demographic change in Europe. If you look at the changes that happened in Europe over the past 25 years, we could say, what are some of the big trends that stick out, and is there anything that sets this region apart from the demographic trends elsewhere in Europe?
Maybe I take the mic as well. Thank you very much. Good morning. Since my specialization is in demography, I will probably kick off with the issues and topics which will be discussed here at the conference all the next 2 days. So let me try to be brief in that. This region has seen huge fertility declines in the last 20 years, and many of the countries in the region reached very low fertility levels at moderate levels of economic development, at much earlier stages of economic development than most of the Western European countries. And that's one big challenge with especially countries like Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and some others experiencing very rapid fertility declines to low levels in the last 20 years. There is some silver lining in that. There is some good news. People are having children later in life in a more responsible way. The number of unplanned and unwanted pregnancies in the region is sharply down. The number of abortions is declining everywhere in the region, and that suggests that people are actually exercising their reproductive rights, and that's a good news that kids are planned and wanted. So that's part of the good news about low fertility rates. We all know this region suffers tremendous levels of outmigration, and some countries more than the others. There is some logic in that as well, because countries which experience more economic challenges and pressures, as well as countries which experience regional conflicts, especially the military conflicts 25 or so years ago, experience the largest amount of outmigration, with young people leaving out. And this is a big and worrying trend, of course, because this accelerates the effects of low fertility rates. Who migrates away is especially young people, young generations, and when they eventually have families, many of them have families in Germany, in Italy, and elsewhere in Europe, which accelerates population aging here in the region, because the babies are born somewhere else, and the elderly are staying in this region with rapid increase in the share of people over the age of 65 in the long term. So depopulation, shrinking populations, is definitely a big trend in most of the countries, I think in all countries of the region now. And this region, together with some other countries like Armenia, Georgia, sees the biggest population declines in peace times globally. This is also unprecedented. This is also a new territory, a new experience we have to reckon and we have to work with. There are some good opportunities in that as well. One is the possibility to accelerate the shift towards improving the position of women in these societies. As was mentioned earlier on, there are still huge gender gaps, gender inequalities in the labor market, but also in terms of earnings and, of course, in terms of care for children. And the fact that populations are shrinking and changing gives opportunities to push these societies for more gender equality and faster than elsewhere. And final point, there are a lot of policy discussions now. And I think there is a good opportunity to shift towards family-friendly policies all over the region, because as was mentioned earlier on, every child counts, and the severity of population changes calls for new unconventional approaches to trying to build family-friendly and child-friendly societies fast.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. Our next question is for Tim Judah. And Tim, thank you for being with us. We're super excited that you're here today. Tim is a journalist and author and covers the Balkans and other regions as a correspondent for The Economist. Tim, you have also been a fellow at the Europe's Futures Project at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna and researched demography and depopulation in Central and Eastern Europe. And you're currently publishing a series of articles on depopulation in the region, the first of which was published last week, which we all read with a lot of interest. You mentioned something in your article that I'd like to ask you about. You said, and I quote, "However you look at it, the demographic future of the Balkans and this half of Europe, afflicted by emigration and chronic low birth rates, is dramatic." Can you give us a sense of the main findings of your research and your reporting that led you to this conclusion?
Okay, well, thank you very much. I've got some statistics, and hopefully they can be put on the screen. I saw that you were flicking them up earlier on. Can we have those statistics? Okay, well, okay. Fine. Well, obviously not. Here we are. I mean, here. This is. I mean, to boil it down, you just need to look at these statistics. First of all, I have to say it's extremely hard to get correct statistics in this region for various reasons, which I can go into. But I mean, from what I've managed to put together, I mean, have a look at this. This is from. We're looking at now from 89-90 to 2050. Bulgaria population will shrink by 39%, Romania by 30%, here 29%, Croatia 22%. I mean, people talk about a silver lining, but I don't know what the silver lining is. I mean, my colleague Alida may be able to talk a little bit more about that, but you know, I'm not really quite sure where it is. You know, everywhere we've got this problem of, as you said, of low fertility and aging populations. And although every country is at a sort of different stage, basically everybody's moving in the same direction. One of the kind of leaders, in inverted commas, in this process is, of course, Serbia, which has got one of the oldest populations in the region. And, for example, 2021 is the crucial date for Serbia, because that's the date when Serbia will have more pensioners than people of working age. I mean, everybody's moving in the same direction. It's just that Serbia did dip below fertility replacement levels already in the 1950s. So, I mean, the situation really is dramatic. I think what the research that I've done doesn't really tell you as academics and specialists anything that you don't necessarily know. I think my job is really to sort of translate this into sort of easily understandable language for everybody to understand. And I think the kind of most important thing to understand is that we're at a historical juncture. And what I mean by that is that this area, in fact, all of Europe at different stages of history, and all countries in Europe have been afflicted by by emigration. I mean, in Bosnia, for example, just to take one country of this region, I mean, there was massive outflows of populations, for example, in 1878, and then, of course, you had the wars, etc. So, I mean, obviously, the populations have been affected, but it didn't really matter so much, in inverted commas, when women were having 5 children and 7 children. So this is the point, we're at this historical juncture. Oh, sorry, is that better? Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry, what I was saying was that, all of Europe, every country in Europe has been through periods of massive emigration. For example, just in Bosnia, even in 1878, you had massive outflow of population, and of course wars, First World War, Second World War, the 90s. Of course, all of that has affected population. But in the past, it didn't matter really. I'm saying it didn't matter in inverted commas when people were having, or women were having 5 children or 7 children. If you're having an average of 1.26 children, and you don't have any immigration, then of course, then you're at this sort of negative conjuncture. So we're seeing the coming together of the symptoms of rich countries, like living relatively long lives and low fertility rates, plus the symptoms of poorer countries, which is to say a large-scale emigration. So, as I say, I have to say, I'm not really sure what the silver lining is. I mean, the way it... Hello? Hello, is that working? Great. Well, I have to say, I mean, it's all very nice to talk about silver linings. I don't know what the silver lining is. I mean, you know, I think the country, you know, Bosnia and most of the countries of the region are going towards situations of just becoming older and poorer, and that's a catch-22, because as you get older and poorer, then more people are going to leave. So I'm not very optimistic about the future. So I don't know if you want to pick up on that, but I mean, as I say, my colleague Alida Vracic has been working on this, trying to find the silver lining.
Well, thank you for the perspective, and I see the microphone went off as soon as you said there was no silver lining.
Oh,
so
okay.
Obviously, somebody else wants to see a different perspective, but no, really, thank you. I think what you are presenting is very alarming. The question to me is, should we have this alarm? And before I pass back to Adnan, I'd like to ask Tomasz again, very quickly. Do you agree with this perspective?
Well, it's difficult not to see the huge challenges and some of the really dramatic changes which are happening right now, last 20, 30 years in the region. So in a way, I concur with Tim in agreeing that this is unprecedented scale of demographic change, and this is extremely challenging. At the same time, I think there are some opportunities in this. One thing I would like to mention is that societies are shifting towards emphasizing health, well-being, quality of life. This will matter in the future much more than the numbers themselves. I think for the economy to prosper in the future, there are opportunities. For instance, if you keep the same amount of investment in children and families, if you, for instance, can easily expand public childcare, which is very low in the region at the moment, with the same staff, same number of kindergartens, the shrinking numbers of births means that for parents it will be easier to find places for their children in childcare. If the labor market is reformed much more quickly, because women have still very low participation rates in the region, there are a lot of untapped potentials which can be tapped. You know, coming from a country where you commute long time to work because there are traffic jams, housing is crazy for young people in many cities in Western Europe. Things will work out here differently. Probably the pressure for young people on the labor market will be easier than now. Perhaps it will be much easier to find decent housing and establish a family in the future. Perhaps life will not be so hectic as in some other places in Europe where cities are booming and not able to accommodate sometimes the number of people who would like to live in. Lastly, maybe one point which is a little bit controversial. This is an occasion to build pragmatic migration policies. First, of course, which is very natural, reaching out to the diaspora. There are millions of people from the region living in Western Europe who may one day be interested in investing their money, resources, and skills, coming back and see some future in here if the situation improves, especially economically. But also,
we will discuss about that a little bit later,
yes,
maybe.
But also, this is an opportunity to build pragmatic migration policies, being more open towards immigration from other places as well.
So, Tomasz, you've given us some elements of a silver
Thanks a
lining.
lot. Yeah,
I pass
we will
it
have
back to
opportunity
Adnan. Yes.
to discuss about that. It's a great topic, of course. And we are now turning to Mrs. Alida Vračić for our next question. Mrs. Vračić is a political scientist and co-founder and executive director of the Sarajevo-based think tank Populary. Mrs. Vračić, you have researched the so-called brain drain from the Balkans in the direction of Western Europe. If you look at the past 25 years or so, what are the factors that make young people leave their home countries in such big numbers?
Many thanks. Doesn't work.
I think, yeah.
This one works? Yeah, perfect. Many thanks. First of all, many thanks for having me here. Sarajevo is my city, but I haven't been able to present my research so far actually in Sarajevo. I spent 3 years working on brain drain and emigration points, but also looking for the silver linings. And for that point, and I assume we're gonna discuss this in the second round, we're gonna speak about basically what are the solutions in place. If we speak about the reasons, there are numerous ones, and really one has to conduct a serious research to understand why we actually got where we are at this point. But I think we can sort of divide them into 2 or 3. The first one would be certainly economic one. We're talking about unemployment or employment opportunities. We're talking about GDP growth. We're talking about macroeconomic indicators. Just if you look at the macroeconomic indicators, it becomes really, really clear what are the conditions at destination point. So in our respect for the region, this is Germany primarily, but also other countries in the Western Europe. And what are the conditions back home? And if you just compare the two, basically you will find the gaps immediately. In terms of salary points, for example, average salary in the region would be around 450 euros. For the same amount of work and for the same type of services, you would earn at some points, at destination points, around 2,000 euros. So this is immediately one thing to be sort of look at. At the same time, it's not only economic ones. There are surveys showing that people are also leaving massively the region because of socio aspects. And socio aspects are really, really difficult to quantify, if you will. But they're definitely present. And if you look at the surveys, for example, being done by Barometer, RCC that does, or for example, Gallup, or even some in Croatia. And Croatia is a super interesting point that I'm using very frequently in my comparisons, because it's actually the country that is part of the European Union. So this whole myth about us getting into the European Union, that will be a quick fix basically for immigration, that it will be halted and people will want to stay, doesn't really stay in place. The same research has been done by TIM to some extent in Romania and Bulgaria, because these are also the countries of the European Union. So one has to really look at this very holistically. There are all sorts of reasons that people point out. Corruption would be one. Corruption is a very interesting one. Again, not an easy one to quantify because people differently perceive corruption. For some, corruption is an everyday, basically, attitude with the government that you have and services that you have. And for the others, it's a somewhat abstract concept of corruption, but it's definitely there. You have oppressive systems. You have religious freedoms. You have all sorts of things that, especially for the young, talented, smart people, are simply not acceptable ones. And this is why they decide to leave. So one has to be really careful. How do we sort of determine which are the worst of the worst factors? So economic ones will be certainly the ones. But more and more it comes out that, you know, you have people with jobs leaving the country. Also people with families, entire families are leaving because of services. If you have no doctors, if you have no teachers, you will have entire families basically emigrating to the points where they can get services. So it's really, really interconnected, the whole thing. And I don't think we can even start discussing the silver line if we haven't seriously attacked the issue. So there are a series of policies that I can speak afterwards, where I have been looking comparatively at some other countries like Ireland, which is an interesting case, because this is exactly as you pointed out. This is where they use diaspora. We're talking about Irish diaspora is 70 million. only 4 million people in Ireland, and 70 million strong diaspora. If you now sort of translate that into our terms, we're talking about at least 6 million strong diaspora from the Western Balkans. And this is where the potential basically sits, because these people are ready to engage one way or the other. We don't have to necessarily attract them back, but we can certainly use the networks. We can use diaspora direct investments. All sorts of tools are in place that could be used for this purpose.
Yeah, Alida, for example, if you discuss with some people who left Bosnia and Herzegovina, they had good salaries here. They had, some of them, of course, they had a good position in society. And if you ask them for the reason, just two verbs: no system.
Or it's the impotence. This is how I like to call it, because they feel that they actually cannot contribute meaningfully to the processes. And if you cannot be part of the society in a meaningful way, this is where you decide that you're not going to wait another 20 years. There's also a point, and it has been mentioned early on in the introductory speech, about the EU. It's a very strong point for one reason only. Many people that are now emigrants in the Western Europe have spent 20 years of their life waiting to be part of the European Union. And they're not simply ready to do another 20. And this is basically the point.
Thank you very much. The last question in this round goes to our next speaker, Mrs. Fatma Bulic. Mrs. Bulic is a youth advocate and an advocate for the rights of the people with disabilities across Europe, and project coordinator at the Information Center for the Persons with Disabilities, Lotos, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And she's 22, you know. And she's mechanical engineering technician for computer-aided design of advanced technology by training, and has published 3 books on her work. And she is, I repeat, 22. Applause, please.
Thank you, Adnan. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and I'm very glad to be here with you today. As Adnan mentioned, my name is Fatma Bulic.
And my question, I have a question for you, not just introduce.
Okay, sorry.
Stop, please.
Continue.
Just 20 seconds. As a young woman, you know, working with other young people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, what do you see in the main challenges young people face in relation to the bigger population trends we just heard about?
Can I continue now?
Yes.
Thank you. So, my name is Fatma Bulic. I have 22 years, and I work with young people and for young people in the area of Tuzla Canton, Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I'm also very active at the European level. I'm a member of European Disability Forum, a European network on independent living, ENIL, and I have been working in Lotos for almost 4 years. Well, before I start talking, I think it is very important to start by devoting ourselves to create a space for those who are concerned to be engaged from the perspective of the beneficiary. Unemployment. When it comes to unemployment, I have one question for you. I don't want you to answer me on that questions, but I would like you to think about it. Well, my question is, where are we in relation to the challenges? There are 2 basic preconditions for quality education. First, as far as people with disabilities are concerned, the architectural accessibility of the institution is very important, very. Second, expectations, but I will talk about expectations later. Education and employment, or unemployment. Well, in general, the quality of education in Bosnia and Herzegovina is declining. Because this world is changing at the tremendous pace. Young people are experiencing the process of education as an elementary form satisfaction. It is important that we have something on paper, but what we love, what we can do, does not matter because of filling out the form for the next steps. Education for all young people is inaccessible because it all depends on where are we live, how much money we have, depending on when public transportation goes or does not go, whether we own a family car or not. These are all preconditions that all young people face in their educational process. Young people do not have the opportunity to get the quality education they need because, of course, it's not linked to the labor market. In addition, people from marginalized groups are even more disadvantaged because of the additional problems they face due to ethnically, economic ability, disability, etc., etc., etc. And additionally, they are more excluded, labeled, and marked. When we talk about barriers in sexual and reproductive health, well, we have discrimination, taboos, gender rules that are quite restrictive, rules that are some kind of traditionally assigned, that is determined by the attitudes of religious communities, are all barriers when it comes to sexual and reproductive health. There are things in the collective value system when it comes to sexual and reproductive health that are invisible. For example, the menstrual cycle for the girls who live in rural areas are the shameful thing, and it's not allowed to talk about it in the front of the male family members. And when it comes to girl with mental disability, things get worse because the girl is not aware what is happening to her body, and because of the traditional treatment, she is not even able to learn that is a natural process in every woman's life. Relationship before marriage is a matter of moral commitment, and when it comes to menstrual cycle, it's a natural phenomenon in which 16% of the girls learn absolutely nothing because it's not talked about enough. Therefore, of course, there are problems with starting family. If we did not provide the preconditions for life, how could we expect making a family? Birth rate increase. They are economically and socially guiding factors that cause the problems. That is, there is no job, it's not easy to get the apartment, the time of family attachment is extended, as well as the reliance on the family resources. It limits everything. But on the other hand, some new trends does not propagate the information to society at all. I think this is a problem that is not answered, unfortunately. Responses to a new value system where women and girls are unwilling to embrace the traditional value system, and they become more aware of their role in the society and their independence and the right that belong to them. And on the other hand, there is no alternative. There is no way for a woman to experience her role as a mother and wife who builds her dignity and gives you opportunity. Each of our rules should meet some of our needs. As a rule, the role of mother and wife means you can't have a job, you can't have a career, less employment, household responsibilities. It would be so nice if a woman can function in a way that upholds her dignity and her rights and ultimately her personality in all rules. And that is what we should be all working on. As the starting point for the circumstances in which we are now, the values we are now in, they are values that have disappeared, that they need to be reaffirmed and given a framework of modern times. In general, young people and their position in society are different. And with these differences and equals, we all live. From people who are very active in their changing communities, running marathons, climbing the mountains, advocating, singing, to people who spent their entire lives in a family house without a real desire for socialization and opportunities to thrive. And what do you think? That's because of what? It's because the starting point of all of us is different. What it means, for example, to be an activist for a person who living in urban city with adequate systematic support, and what it means to be an activist for a young person with disability who lives in village without being able to get adequate orthopedic supplies and attend primary and high school. In societies, in fact, the focus should shift from what is now represented by you can't do it, you don't know it, let me do it, to that you can do it, you know it, and I believe in you. And these are the expectations that I mentioned at the beginning, as well as seeing difference in what a young person can do and what they know and what kind of support they need to make it happen. Because the worst thing we can expect from young people and their problems is to pretend that there are no problems. And this is also written in the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as long as respected for diversity and as a universal design of the human beings. Society create standards that do not exist. The point is that a person who is marginalized is more at risk of being excluded. But also the fact is that society is very rude and does not accept those same diverse people who is not fit into the standards. What diversity entails is appreciating difference and creating circumstances, which is why we are talking about universal design. We create a society so that without future adapting, there is an opportunity for as many people as possible to benefit. And this is only possible if you respect and recognize the diversity in people. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatma. Yes. Before Alana, just short technical, please. We must be very concrete, pretty quickly, because we have not more than 15 minutes, because my colleagues, journalists, and team colleague journalists are waiting for the press conference, and we don't want to, wait so long. We wait politicians, and, we have a good experience with waiting, but today, we could change it. Okay, Alana.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fatma. And thank you for bringing in sort of the social norms and the values and the things that we need to have in society so that young people want to have a future in their country. Thank you for that. Now we're moving more to the solution side. So we've painted a relatively bleak picture, I would say, of the diagnostic of where we are. There's a little bit of disagreement about whether there's a silver lining or no silver lining. So now I want to move back to Tomasz. You've done a lot of research on what works and what doesn't to address the challenges that we've been speaking about. What do you think are the key ingredients for turning demographic change into opportunity?
Thank you. I don't want to speak too much because I mentioned some of these points already 5 minutes, 10 minutes ago. Let me try to wrap it up. I think, first of all, these countries need to economically develop. These countries need to cooperate with each other. This region is still very fragmented in terms of cooperation between countries, in terms of communication. Economic development brings prosperity, and this really means that's a big part of having the future here. Southern European countries used to suffer brain drain in the 1960s, 1970s. Later on, Spain and Italy became one of the biggest immigration countries in the late 1990s, in 2000s. Ireland in the 19th century suffered many decades of famine and outmigration, yet 20 years ago it became one of the countries with fastest population increases and fastest highest rates of immigration in Europe. What was mentioned also that people need to see future in these countries, so governments, good governance, observing political rights, reproductive rights, is part of changing the demographic situation here. Investing in young people and families, building family-friendly societies is definitely something which has to be done. Reforming labor market, opening it to women and elderly as fast as possible. That's perhaps the last thing I would like to mention.
Thank you
so much.
Tim, did you know that his real name Timothy Emmanuel, yeah, you know now. In your recent article, you say to slow and hopefully reverse the decline, governments need to make countries that people want to live in. I think this really captures the essence of the problem very nicely. And you also, and just not you, also say it's not just about money.
Well, I mean, of course, it's not just about money. I mean, if somebody's paid 300 euros and they can earn 2,000 or 3,000 elsewhere, then that's a major factor. But if, I mean, I have a friend who left for a good job in this region after she'd invested her money in an apartment which was being built. And then discovered that the developer had sold it twice and sold it to somebody else. And going to the court will take years, will cost thousands through the in lawyers' fees, and she's still paying a mortgage, and that's just a simple problem of the fact that in this region that law and justice are not quite as developed as they could be elsewhere. That's just a small example. But I do want to say also that it's although I was sort of quite gloomy, and I am quite gloomy in general terms, actually the picture is a little bit more kind of nuanced within countries, because don't forget that although there's maybe a sort of general exodus and populations are decreasing, I mean in certain places and in certain areas you actually have things being reversed. I mean, a very clear example is in Romania, where the situation, where, as I say, population is still decreasing because of low birth rates and immigration, etc. But within Romania, you have certain cities and regions which are developing. So you've got depopulation and empty villages and small towns with no doctors and people leaving. But you also have kind of boom towns like Cluj and like Timișoara. And because young people are coming, because they're based on the knowledge economy, because Cluj's development strategies is based on its university, you've got a lot of IT and all sorts of things happening there. So it's not only attracting people from the rest of Romania, it's attracting people from other parts of Europe. So you have students, for example, going to study in Cluj from France. So actually, you know, things can be done. The problem is that you need 1,000 Clujes or 1,000 Timișoaras across the region to change things. On the downside, where money and where perhaps law, justice, where administration works properly in a place like Eastern Germany, you still have demographic problems and depopulation. And so if you can't solve it in Eastern Germany, which doesn't have any of the other problems of the former communist parts of Europe, then I'm not very optimistic.
Okay. Alida, you have looked into ways to turn brain drain into opportunity. Maybe you could give us some examples of how immigration can be good for this part of the world or everywhere in the world.
Right. Let me try to be very concrete. I think it's really not an exaggeration to say that our entire future of this region depends on good immigration, migration policies and strategies that we're going to develop further on. So it has to be taken seriously. And if you just look at the EBRD or World Bank's reports, for example, for this region, it becomes more clear what needs to be done and where to look for immediately. World Bank report basically says the following. If we continue with the current growth that we had since 2001, we are going to converge, economically speaking, with the European level standard in 60 years. So we're not going to be around probably. This is the tempo that is being projected and forecasted for the region. So the first thing first, of course, is to tackle the economic factor. But I don't think it's going to get that easy only one, because things have to work in parallel. You have to give people a sense that they want to stay in this region. You want to give them a social tissue that they can work with, basically. But you also want to look comparatively into other examples. Ireland has been brought up a couple of times. I mean, I've done research on Ireland and really did try to compare it with the region, which does make sense in many different ways. Just to give you one number, in 1988, 70,000 people left Ireland. 70,000 people left Ireland. Since Ireland has opened up, it has opened up, unlike other countries, also towards immigration. So it accepted people from Bulgaria, Romania, and other places. And if you go to Dublin now, probability that you will meet someone from the Western Balkans is extremely high, because you have Croatians actually emigrating to Ireland. Now, Ireland is also interesting because what they've done since Mary Jo Robinson was the president at the time, they coined their own diaspora as Global Irish. It wasn't about emigration. It wasn't about emigrants. It wasn't about those over there that emigrated. It was Global Irish. We're all part of the same, basically, family. And since they have done everything pretty much in their power to try to understand, first of all, what is going on. I mean, Tin has brought that up, and we have spent together probably a year working on statistics. It very much depends which source you're looking at in order to understand how many people are missing. I was in Belgrade at the Belgrade Security Forum 2 days ago, which was also interesting because we had a panel on data again, and it was again a problem that you always, there is a range between 15,000 and 40,000 people leaving the region every year from every country of the region. So anything in between is true. There are no incentives for people to actually say that they're leaving because they still enjoy certain rights. And unless they have to deregister, you wouldn't even know that they're gone. So what Ireland basically did, and I try to wrap it up here, is to set up different policies. First of all, include civil society. Conduct surveys. We're talking about household surveys, we're talking about administrative surveys, we're talking about very simple measures that are being anyway done with our really expensive censuses that we have in this region. So it can be relatively easily attached to it. They have also strengthened the points where they know people are going. If Irish are going traditionally to Australia, diplomatic posts there will be strengthened to the point of understanding what this diaspora is about and what they want, what are the barriers for them to return and attract them back home. Offering comprehensive government guarantees, setting up different structures in place. This is all that we discuss as silver lining, but we haven't even begun with the process here. This is something that has to be done, and I don't think we have time to wait. This is why I said projections 60 years from now are not really the most optimistic ones. And I don't think, quite honestly, talented people that are actually digital people these days that can emigrate easily are ready to wait that time. What they want is possibly a circular migration where they can leave, but also anchor themselves back if they're willing to do so. So I think personally there are lots of options, but we haven't really started really discussing it, and there is no commitment yet, real one, that this should be happening.
Thank you, Alida. Alana?
Thank you so much, Alida. I think those are excellent recommendations and exactly the kind of things that we want to capture in this meeting over the next 2 days. We actually have the IMF and the World Bank who have flown in from Washington, who will speak to us about all of the projections, et cetera, and the economic impact. So we're super excited about that. I myself am from the Irish diaspora, just so you know. Canadian from the Irish diaspora, so I think your points are really important. Now, Fatma, back to you, please, because the voice of young people is so important, and you've raised so many important issues. In 1 or 2 minutes, can you just tell us, what do young people in the region expect from their governments? What do they expect when it comes to managing this demographic change that we're talking about and creating opportunities for all people?
I will be very short, don't worry. Well, as I already say, and I told it all the time, all young people that expect is the opportunities. Give us opportunity to learn. Give us opportunity to work. We can make this world a better place to live for all of us if you only just give us an opportunity for that. With adequate system support, we can do everything. We can change this world. So it's all I can say.
I think you've summed it up brilliantly.
Yep, definitely. And on the end, Alana, as the host of this conference, I would like to ask you, as UNFPA see the future of this region in terms of population, catastrophe or opportunity? Opportunity.
Opportunity, absolutely. But I think what we've heard, and I think we could speak for hours on this, it's been a fascinating conversation. But I think what we've heard is before we start developing the solutions, we have to figure out what we're actually trying to fix, right? Because at the same time, we talk about the demographic gloom and doom, but we have older people. We have people living much more than they used to. This is something to celebrate. We should be celebrating the fact that, 20% of our population is over 65. This is wonderful. And they can make a huge contribution until they're 80, 90, 100. The other thing is we should celebrate, as other people have already said, the fact that women are having the number of children they want to have. They're educating those children. Smaller families is not a negative thing. It's about the rights and choices to be able to choose how many you want. So I think so many good things are happening. That it is a reason. And the conversation reminds me a little bit of the 1970s when we spoke about the population explosion, the population, what was it called? The population bomb, only we're doing the opposite, right? And is that helpful? That is what I would like to put here as the United Nations Population Fund. We believe that, yes, we agree with the concerns of government that demographic change is incredibly important to understand, but it can be managed. And we've heard many sort of innovative ways of looking at it, solutions. And I guess we would just add that from the decades of experience that the United Nations Population Fund has in managing with governments, working with governments on managing demographic transition, is that, number one, low birth rates are only one part of the equation. Migration has to be a huge part of the picture. Increasing birth rates doesn't work without equality between men and women. Financial incentives don't work, alone don't work, we've heard that. In this region, people generally do want more than the number of children they're having. They generally do want 2 children, but they need the right environment to make that happen. And that's what you've been speaking about, Fatima. So the main message of this conference, we need to build the human capital. We should not have the fear of small numbers. We should be thinking about the human capital of our populations. And as you said, Tim, making countries that people want to live in. That's it. So I'm going to end on a very optimistic note. We are super excited to be here and have this conversation over the next 2 days. And I do believe that by the end, we will see more of a silver lining. Thank you, Adnan.